بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته مشايخنا الكرام الإخوة الأعزاء عظم الله تعالى أجورنا وأجوركم في هذه المناسبة الأليمة مناسبة استشهاد الإمام الصادق صلوات الله وسلامه تعالى عليه. When it comes to the life of Imam al Sadiq alayhi salam, what we have to do and what we have to try to understand in order to follow the Imam and in order to learn more about his life, we have to read about the teachings that he had given to us. Imam al Sadiq alayhi salam lived at a time when there was a lot of turmoil, a lot of problems in the Islamic nation. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had revealed the message of God to the people. He brought the religion of Islam. Following his death, the Shias believed that Imam Ali alayhi salam was the righteous leader to take over and to continue teaching the people about the religion of Islam. In the Shia belief system, we believe that the Imams are people who do not commit sins. Because if you want to follow somebody who represents the religion of God, that person himself has to be someone who applies it fully. Someone who doesn't speak out of their own desire, out of their own ego. If somebody asks me a question about something that I like in life, usually I give an answer that stems from my own ego, my own passions. What food do you like, for example? I'll think about, personally maybe I like pizza or a hamburger. Someone else, possibly a lot of you guys here, would like kebab, for example, or badimjan, for example, eggplants. Everybody has a personal type of liking. And we see that in religion also, or when it comes to the way we want to live our life, we all talk about life as if we are the best people who know how to live that life. And this is natural. Every human being thinks about life the way they understand it. So, how do I live the best life? I think I want to go to school, and then graduate from high school, go to college, get a career. Perhaps maybe I'm after the money, right? Let's say I want to become a lawyer, or I want to become a doctor. Or maybe I'm someone who doesn't care so much about the money, but I'm someone who's artistic. I go into design, or like graphics designing, or some other major that fulfills my own passion and desire. When it comes to religion, God sends an individual who cannot have that personal desire themselves because they're representing God's teachings. And God is the most perfect being in existence. For someone to represent God, they have to be perfect themselves as well. Otherwise, if they're asked a question, they're going to answer from their own desire. So our understanding of the Imams is that they have to be individuals who represent God, and therefore they must be people who do not commit sins. When I ask them questions, I have to make sure that when they answer me, they're telling me what God wants from me, not what the Imam thinks is best. So they speak on behalf of God. This is the Shia belief. After the Prophet ﷺ had departed from this world, the Muslims were divided into two camps. The camp that believed that the succession after the Prophet was a government role. Someone who takes control over the Islamic nation after the Prophet had united all the people together. Because the Arabs, they were all different tribes and they were fighting each other and they weren't united. So what the Prophet managed to do was he managed to get all the Arabs to unite together. The first time in the history of the Arab world, the different tribes and nations became one. He managed to remove all the differences, all the racism, all the problems that were developing and had developed within the Islamic or the Arabic nation. The Prophet had removed those. And now he put everybody under the banner of Islam. And usually when you have different tribes combining together, you have a large number of people now. Japan was the same thing. It was divided into different dynasties and different empires. There were different emperors in Japan. Once there was an emperor in the Japanese dynasty who united all of them together. And what he did after, he gained so much power and strength, he attacked Korea at that time. He took over more land. Why? Because now they're not busy fighting internally with each other. Now they're all united, they have more number, therefore they have a larger army, they have an ability to focus on fighting and gaining extra land instead of fighting between each other. The Arabs were the same thing. The Prophet managed to unite them together, and some people, when they saw that the Arabs are growing larger in number and even non-Arabs have joined Islam, they saw this is a very good chance for us to develop a very strong army and start attacking nations outside, gaining more land, more money, and living a better life. So this is one camp. One camp was thinking in a political way. They saw the Prophet as a person who was a very good politician. He was able to combine all these people together. And then they took advantage of that and they said, we want to lead these people so that we can attack other nations and expand and then take the wealth from them. Another camp believed that no, the Prophet ﷺ was not just a good politician and a person who God has only revealed the Quran to. That other camp believed that the Prophet was a perfect individual. An individual who, throughout his life, he had practiced faith and spirituality and worship until he reached a very high level of perfection, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had chosen him to be the final messenger. And to be a messenger, especially the final messenger, you have to be a person who is able to represent God in the most perfect way. Not that God reveals to him the Quran and he tells us this is only the Quran and that's it. No. His behavior, his speech, his actions, all of them must be actions that represent Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we all see this. If you work a little bit on yourself, you start realizing that your speech is affected. If somebody is lying all the time, then they lie to an extent that they start not being able to differentiate between what's truth and what's coming out of their mouth as a lie. It becomes a habit, a very bad habit. On the contrary, if you become a very good person and you're always honest, honesty becomes a habit. It becomes a trait inside of yourself. So you're always able to speak to people with honesty because you've trained yourself to be an honest individual. Our belief is that the Prophet was that individual who had that honesty, and he was so high spiritually that he represented Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his perfection. And therefore, we believe that the person who comes after the Prophet to represent the Prophet and the message must be an individual who is able to imitate the Prophet in that behavior. He has to have the same characteristics. And that's why we believe Imam Ali alayhi salam is the person who came after Rasulullah, because he has those characteristics. He's able to answer questions about the deen, about religion, the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. He doesn't answer from his own desire. And we see this. A lot of the companions, especially after the Prophet's death, whenever they were asked about a verse in the Quran, some of them would answer in a way that was in agreement with their own passion and desire. They began to change in the religion. The prayer that the Rasul used to pray, an action that was done by him 5 times a day. And all the Muslims who prayed with him witnessed how the Prophet used to pray. 5 times a day you do something and people see you, you can't imagine that this is something that people are going to forget, right? This is something that should be very clear to everybody. Yet when we look at how the Muslims pray nowadays, we see there are different types of salat, different types of prayer. Some people pray with their hands down, some people pray with their hands folded. How did this difference occur? Well, if we look at history, there were individuals who were okay with additions made to the deen. Somebody saw that praying with your hands folded, he thought, hey, you know what? That looks like a nice thing. It's respectful. I've seen other nations, doing that in terms of respecting people who are, grand or people who are above them. Why not we add this to the salat? So this is someone who's acting from his own desire, from his own whim. He's not following the teachings of the Prophet. He's saying that this looks nice. Well, who told you that God wants you to say, do what looks nice? Who told you that this is what God wills for you to do? Not everything that looks nice or respectful is something that God wants you to do. So the Imam is the one who's able to safeguard us from going into these problems. After Imam Ali alayhi salam came Imam al alayhi salam. And during that period was a very, very difficult period for the Muslims. Imam Ali alayhi salam was killed, he was assassinated, and then there was a gap. The Umayyads, they were a dynasty at that time, a family that wanted to take control of the Muslims. Imam Ali was killed, they wanted to take government and control after him. Now, there was a struggle because Imam Hassan alayhi salam was supposed to be the leader after Imam Ali alayhi salam, and then there was discussions and dialogue, and the Imam ruled for a short period of time, and then the Umayyads took over. And we all know what happened after that. Karbala happened, Imam Hussein alayhi salam was there. He saw that the religion has become corrupted, that the teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are not being implemented. The prayer was disappearing. The teachings, the Quran was not being implemented in people's lives. So he went to defend the deen and to bring back the teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he was killed and martyred in Karbala. After that happened, it created a shock in the Islamic nation. Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam was the next Imam who took over, and then Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, and then Imam al Sadiq alayhi salam came, who we are commemorating this night for. Imam al Sadiq alayhi salam's time is when those Umayyads who took the government after Imam Ali and Imam Hassan alayhi salam were beginning to collapse. Another dynasty, it was called the Abbasid dynasty. These are two empires. They began fighting with one another because the Abbasis wanted to take control. So during that period of war, Imam al Sadiq alayhi salam had lived. And if we go back to Imam Baqir alayhi salam, there's a hadith where the Imam says that there is nothing from the sunnah of the Prophet, from the traditions of the Prophet, that remains until this day. Imagine what a claim the Imam is making. The Prophet's teachings and his sunnah had completely almost disappeared from the Muslim nation. To the point that, if we go back looking at Imam Ali alayhi salam's life, when he used to pray, some of the companions who prayed behind him used to say that he reminds us of the prayer of Rasulullah. Imagine, the fourth caliph, when people used to pray behind him, they remembered how the Prophet used to pray. So during this whole period, there was a different prayer that was being done. So Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam says that nothing of the sunnah remains until this day. And that's why we see that the Imams had focused on returning the teachings of the Prophet to the lives of the Muslims. This is a big project that the Imams were trying to do. Imam al Sadiq alayhi salam, he took that responsibility. It was a very good opportunity because the politicians were busy fighting each other, and there was a gap. There was an ability for the Imam to speak to people and to go teach, and nobody would bother him from the politicians. Nobody would come after him. So he began teaching, and he began spreading the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and returned the teachings to their origin. But the way that the Imam did it is very interesting. If we look at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he began by telling people what to do and introducing this religion to them. Once people became Muslims and their hearts became firm in Iman, he began teaching them extra things to do. And then we see Imam al Sadiq alayhi salam using a very similar tactic. If we look at our time nowadays, we see that a lot of people focus on using religion or understanding religion as an outer thing or a cultural thing that we do. When we raise our children in the West, we have to understand that the Western world is not like the Eastern world. If you're born in Iraq or born in Lebanon or in Iran or in any Muslim country, your child naturally lives in a Muslim environment. They hear the adhan 5 times a day. They go to school, they have Muslim friends, they have Muslim teachers. They hear the Quran being played in the masjid. They go to ziyarah if they can. The Muslims are the majority over there. So naturally your child learns most of their deen and religion from the environment that surrounds them. You come here to the West, it's not the same case. Your child spends most of their day around non-Muslims. They're exposed in the schools to things that are not Islamic. No speaking of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no mention of Ahlul Bayt, no mention of Rasulullah. On the contrary, everything opposite to that is being mentioned to them. They come home, the father's busy at work, too tired to do anything when he comes home. The mother does what she can, for example, if she's not working. Some families of Muslims, the mother and the father are working. And this child is left to the community and the environment to teach them and to make them grow. The problem is that this is a very big challenge that we have to understand. When it comes to teaching the child, we have to teach them the right way. Sometimes I have a child, I think I want him to become طفل مؤمن مثلا, a good mu'min. So what do? I force them to do salat every time on time. I force them to read the Quran, for example. By forcing them to do so many things and telling them this is haram, this is haram, this is haram, this is haram, giving them a whole list of haram things and a whole list of wajib things, and expecting this child, just by doing that by force, that they're going to become religious individuals as they grow up. But in reality, this is not how it works, especially here in the US. You cannot force your child to do something. They might be doing it once they're under your roof, but as soon as they leave, they're going to say, this is something my parents were forcing me to do. I don't want to do it. I don't understand it. I don't have a relationship to it, and I want to leave this. A lot of times this happens, a very negative relationship with deen. And a lot of times, the children observe when they go to the gatherings of the mu'mineen that they have a certain way of dressing, a certain way of behaving. They have a long beard, masalan. They have a long dress, they talk in a certain way. But then they observe their behavior and they see that these people also lie. They're not truthful individuals. They're not organized, for example. They're not individuals who I can believe are good people. So if these people are not very good and they follow this religion, then that religion doesn't have to be a good thing. And this is what Imam al Sadiq alayhi salam had to deal with also during his time. A lot of Muslims at that time looked like very good Muslims. A lot of people were claiming to be Muslims. A lot of spiritual groups were developing. The Sufis, for example, at that time, were people who claimed to be detached from this dunya. These individuals, they lived at Imam al Sadiq's time. That to be a Muslim, you have to be detached from this world. You have to go live on the mountain, to become a monk, leave everything in this world, and just live with God and pray and fast all day. This is one group. Another group changed the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And another group changed the tafsir of the Quran, the commentary on the Quran. So the Imam had to deal with all these different changes that happened during his time. So if we look at the hadith of the Imam, and I'm going to quote a few here and end with that inshallah. We see that the Imam was telling the people to focus on taking religion very easily. Do not take religion as a difficult thing for yourself. When you have somebody who's not even connected to religion, you cannot expect them to become prophets in their behavior. You cannot have an expectation of your child to become one of the grand scholars or maraja, for example. A marja behaves differently from a regular scholar. A regular scholar behaves differently from a regular individual. And a regular individual who's living in a Muslim country behaves differently than someone who is living in the West, for example. We have to understand that when we present religion to people, especially our children, we have to teach them that religion is a very simple and beautiful thing. The approach that we have to have with them has to be in this manner. If we look at these ahadith, for example, a hadith by a companion named Abu Basir, he narrates that Imam al Sadiq alayhi salam one day said that my father passed by me while I was going around the Kaaba. He was doing Hajj or Umrah, and he was going around the Kaaba. And his father, Imam al Baqir alayhi salam, had passed by him. He saw him doing the tawaf. The Imam said, I was young at that time, and I was exerting myself in worship, meaning I was putting so much pressure on myself to be a good mu'min, to be a good Muslim. I was doing everything mustahab. I was trying to please Allah in every single way. So the Imam says, I was exerting myself. I was putting pressure on myself in worship. Imam al-Baqir, my father, saw me dripping with sweat. That's how much the Imam was putting effort in this worship. Then the Imam al-Baqir turned to Imam al Sadiq and said, "O Ja'far, O my son, when God loves a servant, He will be satisfied with something easy from him." He's teaching him something. It's not the amount of things that you do. Sometimes you might do one little thing in your life and you do it very sincerely to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You choose not to hurt anybody in your life. You do your salat, it might be a very short salat. You might not be doing a salat that takes 20, 30 minutes. A 2-minute salat, but you do it with a sincere heart. You do it because you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the middle of your work, you choose to go and pray for a little 3-minute break on time, instead of, for example, waiting to go home and taking 30 minutes to pray. You say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm sure He will look at me and maybe loves this 3-minute prayer more than He loves the 30-minute prayer. This is possible. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was a loving God. We have to understand that no matter how much we do, it's not going to buy us heaven. We go into heaven because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that allows us out of His mercy and love to go into heaven. You can never buy yourself into heaven. If I pray 1,000,000 rak'ahs, it doesn't make me deserve to go into heaven. Because in reality, how do I pray those rak'ahs? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who's allowing me to pray. He gave me the strength. So really, I don't take all the credit for that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who takes the credit for this. So our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to be that relationship where we don't think that Allah is very expectant from us. He doesn't want us to be these perfect individuals. And the children, how do they learn this? They learn it how their parents treat them. If a parent is very strict on their child, he wants them to graduate in a certain way, to get certain grades in schools, and he punishes them if he doesn't do that, they begin to develop this understanding and perception of Allah the way the parent treats them. So the parent has to be very careful how they treat their children. To treat them with love and to allow them to make mistakes and develop and grow themselves. In another hadith, Ismail bin Yasar, who was another companion, says, I heard Imam al Sadiq alayhi salam say, your God is merciful. He accepts or He thanks even something little from you. If you do a little bit, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept from that. Don't think that in order for Allah to be happy from you, you have to read the whole Quran in 1 month. Sometimes I read one surah, one chapter, a few verses. Before I sleep at night, I say, Allah, I want to read one verse because I want to read your book. I want to hear you talking to me. Only one ayah of the Quran. Allah will take that from you. He loves if you do that. He might raise you spiritually and put you in heaven just for reading that one verse with that sincere heart, because Allah is a merciful God. In another hadith, a companion says, I asked Imam al Sadiq alayhi salam about a man who vowed to go to Mecca barefoot. Somebody wanted to go Hajj to the Kaaba. He wanted to go barefoot without wearing shoes. Imagine walking on rocks and stones and sand. What happens to your feet? They get ripped, right? Why did this man want to do this? Because he thought that if I go barefoot and I put pressure on myself, maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept my Hajj, as opposed to going comfortably. So the Imam replies to him. He said that the Messenger of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam went out to perform Hajj one day, and he saw a woman walking with camels. He said, who is this? She wasn't riding on the camel. She was walking there. So the Prophet asked, who is this? They told him she is the sister of a guy called Uqba bin Amir. She vowed to walk to Mecca barefoot. She made a promise to Allah that I want to walk to Mecca barefoot. Then the Prophet ﷺ said, O Uqba, her brother, go to your sister and order her to ride on the camel and not to walk barefoot. God has no need of her walking and being barefoot. God doesn't need you to torture yourself in order for Him to be pleased of you. You don't have to kill yourself to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Living in the West, the fact that I'm praying here in the West amidst this difficult situation with all these fitnas and troubles, I'm surrounded by so many haram things. The fact that I'm praying only should be something that we allow our children to understand as a very big thing. Maybe if I'm praying in Iraq or Lebanon, it's different. Everybody prays, it's a normal practice. But over here, if my children are doing the bare minimum, I should take that as a great thing and appreciate it and make them understand that what you're doing is an amazing thing. What you're doing is a very big thing in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In another hadith, one of the companions says, I asked Imam al Sadiq alayhi salam, which do you prefer we do during the Hajj? Do we walk to Hajj or do we ride to go to Hajj? The Imam says, I prefer that you ride, because that will preserve your strength for supplication, reading dua and worship. Sometimes the Imam is saying that I need to preserve my energy in order to do a better dua. I might be able to walk barefoot, but by the time I reach Mecca, I feel like I need to sleep for 2 days. Or as I'm walking, I feel like I need to drink 3 Red Bulls in order to get the energy to get to Mecca, right? Well, God doesn't want you to do something that requires 3 Red Bull cans. If that's what you need, then maybe there's something wrong with it. Don't think that by doing more, it necessarily means that you are a better person and Allah loves you more. Think about doing what is sincere. Even if it was just a little bit, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept it from you. And this is the mentality that we have to have here in the West, especially when we teach our children about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We shouldn't teach them that God is a very harsh God. It's very difficult to please Him. That if I do something, that Allah is going to punish me immediately. This is sometimes, we use this as a tactic when we raise our children. We tell them, if you do that, Allah is going to burn you. Allah is going to throw you in hell. Allah is going to do this to you. So they grow up with this idea that God is a very strict God. They think that God is like their father or their mother. As soon as I do something wrong, God is waiting for me so He can punish me. This is a wrong mentality to have over here. Here, children need to understand that God is merciful. Yes, there is a punishment if I do something wrong. But we shouldn't approach the deen like that. The more we build a relationship of love and mercy between the child and Allah, the more they appreciate it here and they build that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Maybe in some harsh societies, children don't care much about this emotion of love. But here in the US, mercy and love is the main idea that attracts people to things. This is how we grow up over here. This is the mentality that we have. We watch it in the movies, we read it in books. It's all over this country here. So this is the idea that we have to attract our children with. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So in the life of Imam al Sadiq alayhi salam, we can understand from his life and his teachings that our approach to religion has to be very well studied and understood. Sometimes my child is not a bad child. Sometimes it's the way I'm speaking to my child and teaching my child that pushes him away from deen. If I had used a different method, maybe my child would have become a very good believer and a very good mu'min. Why doesn't my child to come to the majalis, for example? Why doesn't my child participate in majalis, for example? Well, maybe I'm not providing to those children what they need to connect to this deen. Maybe I'm not teaching them what is necessary for them, because I understand the world the way I see it myself. I think that, the majlis, if it's in this way or in that way, it's more attractive, but that's true for me. My child didn't grow in the East, for example. He grew up here. What attracts my child? What brings attention to them? What gains their attention? I have to think as a child. Sometimes it's hard for us to do that because we weren't born and raised in this situation. I was born here in the US. And I still have a very difficult time understanding what my younger brother's talking about. There's a very, very big gap. Every generation, the gap is growing bigger and bigger. So we have to put extra effort to understand what we have to do to bring our children to this deen. Our methods maybe have to change. The way we deliver the message has to change. And the way we teach the deen, maybe we shouldn't be as harsh on them as our parents were on us, or as those scholars are in the East over there. The taklif over there is very different than the taklif over here. Here we need them to understand why Allah exists, why the Prophet exists. They have to have an intellectual understanding. And then, when they practice, we shouldn't put too many expectations from them. I say this and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the insight to understand how to deal with our children in this country and how to build a relationship with Him as well. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa ala alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.